We have come to you at a very difficult time in the history of our country. We are visiting the National Assembly because of its unique position in our Constitution. The democratic system we run in our country rests on three arms of government. Of these three arms, the other two function in accordance with laws made by this arm. This arm characterizes democracy, because in a military government, you would have both the judiciary and the executive. But it is only in a democratic government that you have a parliament. The parliament is a microcosm of the people, because every section of the country has, by adult suffrage, delegated its voice to this parliament. So we believe that by visiting you today, we are coming to speak to the conscience of our country. We ask that this discussion today be as frank as possible, because in situations like this, unless the National Assembly rises like one man with a conscience, a commitment, and a patriotism to unveil the facade of partisan politics and partisan advantages and face the real issues of the nation, will stand on the edge of a precipice. We have come to you, sir, at a time when our economic stability is in serious danger. Today, our international debt is extremely high, perhaps one of the highest judged by the IMF for countries with our GDP. Our domestic debt is high and growing by the day. Our subsidy indebtedness is something that has defied solution and transparency in disclosure. Our youth despair is gargantuan. The federating units in this country, in the unitary system that we call a federal government, are surviving with great difficulty. The federal government has made bailouts just to sustain recurrent expenditure of our state governments. Many of the important units of great growth in our country, namely industrial concerns, are either not producing at all or producing short of installed capacity. Job creation is low. Despondency stares us in the face. Political instabilities have compounded this, Mr. President. At no time except during the Nigerian Civil War have people been killed in the rate in which they are being killed today in Nigeria. In 1 year, we have recorded more than 1,000 killings. What is surprising is that these killings are not matched with equal reaction by the security forces in our country. There is a resultant lack of confidence in the institutions of government, especially the institutions that are responsible for law and order. Our courts speak from two sides of the mouth. Our Chief Justice said that corruption in the judiciary is not only ingratiation of judicial officers, but deviation from the rules of engagement by judges, by making pronouncements that are completely out of pattern in the exercise of dispensation of justice. We have had, today in Nigeria, our courts make proclamations that whether you commit crime or not, you may not be arrested or even prosecuted. It is unprecedented in any democracy. Mr. President, distinguished senators, we have come as elders. We have come as fathers. We have come as heads of different socio-cultural organizations of this country who look up to us for leadership to speak in moments of this nature. We have looked at the problem of our country and we think that it is soluble, but we think that there is lack of will. We have come to ginger you to develop that will and to seek a consensus of the leadership of the National Assembly and of the political class who have the necessary legislative empowerment by our Constitution to make decisions that can reverse our situation. And if not in office, you constitute the political class of our country. At times like this, partisanship is criminal. Mr. President of Senate, a number of us on the other side of 60 and above grew up in a different Nigeria. I grew up in a Nigeria where in Enugu, where I come from, the mayor of Enugu in my childhood was a man called Alhaji Umaru Altini from Katsina State. He was elected mayor of Enugu by adult suffrage, campaigning on the platform of the NCNC. He defeated an Igbo man to become mayor of Enugu. Mr. Willoughby, a Yoruba man, was Accountant General of Eastern Nigeria. Mr. President of Senate, going beyond my childhood, I went to the university for my first degree, University of Ibadan. In the University of Ibadan, I dared to stand for election as President of Students' Union in a Yoruba-dominated university. More than 65% of the student folk were Yoruba. My opponent was Yoruba, Banji Adeboro. But I won resoundingly, not because I was Igbo, but because they were Yorubas who were not prepared to be swayed by ethnic considerations, but who were only interested in what the candidates had to offer. In other words, what were the issues? Mr. President, I served in government. I didn't have the privilege to serve with your father in Senate. But I had the privilege of being confirmed minister in a Senate in which your father was leader and in which he was a member of the Senate subcommittee for screening. In those days, the ministerial nominees were screened in a subcommittee of Senate. They went into rigorous exercise of your past, your capability, your points of view on policy, where you have contradicted yourself on policy and where your behavior does not stand up to ministerial stature. I was grilled by your father and yet recommended by your father. I say all this because I see here some of my friends and colleagues, some who even campaigned for me when I dared to run for president. I see people who have the capacity to say, this will not happen in our time. I see people who will say, this does not admit of anything other than patriotism. So we believe that many of the problems we have in our country emanate from the constitution of our country. We know that the National Assembly has had debate on devolution of powers. And we know, Mr. President, that you did promise the nation that you will have a revisit to this issue. We have come to ask you to bring up the revisit. We consider it urgent and inevitable Because we believe that all the problems we have today in Nigeria emanate from the fact that our constitution is not ripe for a country constituted by people of diverse culture, diverse religion, diverse political persuasions as our country. Many other countries with our characteristics have emerged greater. Some have taken the seedlings of their greatness from their country. But we have been kept down by the kind of constitution we run. We have watched the helplessness of the National Assembly, where members of the executive even refuse your invitation to come and make explanations before them, contrary to the provisions of the Constitution. We have found the helplessness of the Senate when you can be invaded in spite of the security adornment in this place, controlled by the executive, and the seat of the Senate president is almost invaded, but for the personal security of the aides of its leadership. This is because our system makes the tail wag the dog rather than the dog wag the tail. This cannot be the fountain of legislative authority for executive implementation, and yet the toy of the system. We have come to tell you that in our view, it is because we have this over-concentration of power in the federal government, contrary to the agreement that our forefathers entered into for a union called Nigeria, that governance has failed in our country, that economic development has failed. Mr. President, I want to give you a few examples. First of all, look at our economic situation. The mainstay of our economy is oil. Without oil, the economy of this country cannot be sustained. Every month we get together and share our sales of oil and distribute it amongst the tiers of government and concentrate it mainly on recurrent expenditure. We grow no wealth. We do so because of the system. In the past, the regions had active competition and it promoted growth. When we went to university, if you wanted to read architecture, you went to Ahmadu Bello University. If you wanted to read medicine, you went to University of Ibadan. If you wanted to read the humanities and engineering, you went to Nsukka. And under the regime of pre and immediate post-independence, in 3 spectacular years, things happened in Nigeria of outstanding proportion. We built the first television station in Black Africa. We built the first iron and steel complex in Black Africa. Import substitution industry was growing in our country in such sequence. Our universities were of such international reputation that it attracted staff from all over the world, as well as student folk. We were the pride of Africa. Suddenly it became retrogression. Mr. President, oil is a declining commodity in the international market. China and the OECD countries have put a time limit between 2020 and 2024 to stop production of any machines dependent on fossil oil. The immediate consequence of this is that there is going to be a fundamental and phenomenal decline in the world demand for oil. 2020 is only 2 years away. What is the sense of urgency around our country about how to cope with this? We are only interested in the appurtenance of power, the sheer ego that I hold power and I can do what I like, not in what our children will be tomorrow. There ought to be a time of national emergency now. What must we do to overcome this calamity that is about to come? America has developed shale oil technology, making its continued dependence on our crude oil practically impossible. Other countries are going to do so. Sir, what are the alternatives? Agriculture. Take a country like Netherlands. It's the 14th largest economy in the world. Netherlands exports just vegetable and dairy of $100 billion in a year. In the history of this country, our oil export has never attained such a level. Every day we make lip service to agriculture. But what are the structural instruments of making agriculture real? We used to have groundnut pyramids. We used to have oil exported, palm oil exported in commercial quantity. We used to have cocoa. Some of those we exported cocoa with are now using it for chocolate. They have secondary industries arising from them. Some who exported palm oil have hydrogenation of fats. They have margarine. You go to Malaysia, they use even the shell of palm nut to make gravel for rural roads. They use the stem, the middle of the stem, to make ceiling sheets. And yet they took their seedlings from Nigeria. It is because our structure of government promoted growth. Mr. President, look at our security. When we had the regional police, this didn't exist. Every state had domestic security. Mr. President, we have come to beg you. You know that sometimes history places one in a particular junction to change the order of things. We see you and your colleagues in a particularly unique junction. You can prevent further bloodshed in this country. You can prevent further drift into our ethnic conclavities. I never knew that after I had won election on a Yoruba vote, I would ever be leader of Igbos. But I am leader of Igbos who want Igbos in a Nigeria with meaning and relevance to national unity. Mr. President, we want you to revisit devolution of power. Because if we have this restructuring and we limit people to minding domestic affairs and we encourage competition between various areas of the country, production will increase, standards will increase, security will increase, mutual respect for each other will increase, friendliness will be encouraged. We want a restructured Nigeria. We want a restructured Nigeria. The alternative, Mr. President, will be worse than the situation we have today. If it is possible for us to have a situation in which people carry AK-47 freely in Nigeria and murder people every day. Yesterday it was 21, day before yesterday it was 17. This is happening as if nobody cares. Some people tell us they came from Libya. When did Gaddafi die? How many years ago? Any security in any country as rich as Nigeria, if this was the problem, would have predicted it, would have organized for it. If the essence of choosing 17 heads of security arms in this country is to ensure that they come from the same area as the president in order to ensure his loyalty, what have they done to guarantee our security? If they must all come from northern Nigeria, please bring those who can do the job. We can no longer tolerate this insecurity. We can no longer feel that some people are strangers in their own country. The escalation of this feeling has only one destination. It will lead inevitably into a breakdown of law and order. Already, we are all relying on self-defense. In the south is where I come from. We have local vigilante groups, and it is monstrously frightening how the Inspector General of Police can tell us that something that has worked should be broken in my place. Before we began local vigilante groups, kidnapping was the highest in the southeast. People could not even have ordinary traditional engagements in their homes. But today, the Southeast is probably the most peaceful place in Nigeria. And we are told that all the guns licensed by the police, which we have not used for armed robbery or for civil insurrection, should be returned to them. Where is this kind of rhetoric? How is this justice viable? So, Mr. President, the kernel of our point is, some of my northern friends told me that the reason why the South wants restructuring is that we do not want them to participate in the oil. Well, I have already told you that the oil is gone. And when the oil goes, the greatest source of national revenue will come from agriculture. The North has a monopoly of animal husbandry wealth. The North has a monopoly of vegetables. The North has a monopoly of dairy. The challenge is that national attention has not been given to the development of it for export potential. The North could virtually finance the whole federation if we give priority to that. So we've not come to make an ethnic representation. We've come to make a patriotic representation. If this does not happen, we have no alternative but to sing the non-dimittus of our country. And God forbid that it should happen. Mr. President, this is the last and desperate attempt to unmask our problems and to speak to power. What else is power except you here? The reason you are not feared is the lack of unity. But you are not looking for 100%. Leon Trotsky and 3 people formed the Red Army that metamorphosed into the Bolshevik Revolution. If Saramadu Bello of blessed memory, Dr. Azikiwe of blessed memory, and Chief Awolowo could not agree, there would not have been anything called independence. They refused to be divided by their tribal privileges. There comes a time when unity is inevitable. We call on you, members of the National Assembly, rise up and save our country.